Other counties may boast of their rich lands, where fat cattle roam at their will. But give me a home in old Breffni, at the foot of a wind-covered hill, there to smell the sweet scent of the heather, and to hear the lone curlew call, the rose tapping light on the casement, and God's blessed peace over all.
So when asked to speak about anything to do with traditional ballads is no different, it's always difficult to know where to start, because if people say start at the beginning, well, therein lies the problem, because the beginnings of tradition, where are they? So instead I'm going to begin with a word which is Din Shankas. And Din Shankas, I suppose, has layers of meaning. The Din Shankas from the 6th century was basically a collection of texts, and prose and ballads about place. And the word Din Shankas itself is translated as meaning lore of place. And I suppose there's plenty of folklore surrounding different areas, and Leitrim is no different. You only have to look at the Folklore Commission collection from 1930s. In the schools collection we see plenty of examples of how Fionnuala Maxwell's thumbprint ended up in a rock or a bridge, or he had dug out a lake and made shimor and the lake sat under it, and so on. And that lore has stayed with us. You know, even now I would know of older generations and younger children who would hear all these stories and still carry them right through to today. Another meaning of Din Shankas, and I love this translation, is actually to breathe tradition. And I think that traditional songs and singing does that, it breathes tradition. So right again from that 6th century on, that's what traditional ballads have done. Din Shankas, though, also is a form of ballad poetry, and it's a form of ballad poetry that celebrates place. And we talk about celebrating place, and the Irish are really, really good at celebrating place. We have a certain affinity for where we come from. I think maybe because we're such a displaced nation. So you only have to look at the example of lovely Leitrim, you know, so made famous by Larry Cunningham, of course, but even it's not the most classically written ballad ever, but lovely Leitrim, it's that lore of place, it's that Din Shankas that people will hold that, with Leitrim connections, they'll hold that song in their hearts. So I think that for me really says that right through from a very early time that these ballads of place were really, really important. And similarly in the ancient manuscripts in Ireland, we learn that poets and bards and fillers were very important. They were held in very high esteem. We're told that, for example, the lowest form of filla, which was an olive, had to be schooled for 12 years to gain that title. And they were schooled in things like poetry, song, history, philosophy, languages, and as I said, held in such high esteem, and what they would have put together would have been really learned. Similarly, in those ancient manuscripts, we also learn that wandering minstrels were hugely important, and particularly to those, obviously, who had them employed. But we're told within those manuscripts that they were really responsible for recording and preserving a lot of what happened at certain times. So it could be events in history and local events and local happenings for families. Unfortunately, we're told that in the manuscripts, but the actual writings themselves and the ballads they would have written are not really available for us to see. There are fragments of them here or there, but to have enough to really go on and to do research on, there's not enough of it there. So really where we get the most maybe sustained gatherings or collections of lyrics would really be through the earliest broadsheets and or what would you call them, kind of song sheets, maybe sometimes people call them broadsides, they have different names. We really had those kind of as a gathering of what was happening in different areas. But going back to the 1600s, I think the earliest was 1626. actually that you can find a broadsheet from Ireland. So these were the broadside ballads that were produced sometimes quite cheaply in ways, and they were really done to make money and for people also to hear what was going on at a certain time. I mean, they were the broadsheets of their time. They brought the news, and broadsides or broadsheets were sold at fairs, so you could have heard a ballad singer singing them at the fair here in Drumsna or Carrick-on-Shannon or Manorhamilton, all sorts. And these broadsides would have probably reached popularity, or they're most popular in the 19th century in Ireland. But we also know the broadsides weren't just sold in Ireland, we also had them in other English-speaking countries. But particularly in Ireland, they had this political connotation. Between the 1800s, 1900s, the ballads were kind of outlawed in a way for political reasons. Obviously there was a lot of kind of infighting and lots of tension going on. So we do know, and I have just a little piece from the Roscommon Leitrim Advertiser from 1829, which speaks about seditious ballad singing. So this ballad singing was outlawed. Just to read a little bit about it, the heading is Ballad Singing, Popular Excitement. We have frequently conceived it our duty to direct the attention of the magistracy of Roscommon and Leitrim to the abominable practice of street ballad singing. We see with regret that the laudable determination of the magistrates of the surrounding counties to stop so shameful a custom to their provinces has caused such an increase of evil in this quarter that the itinerant agents of that class of persons who disseminate so much vile productions appear to have their rendezvous in Boyle. And these retailers of sedition, after their exertions in the several fairs and markets during the week, return to headquarters here to regain their strength and possess themselves with fresh food suitable to the appetite of their votaries. And on Saturday last, a parcel of those agitators of the land met in this town for the purpose of sowing in the minds of their brethren a still greater hatred, if possible, than that already implanted against Protestants and against the government of the land. So it was considered really that it was against the law in some cases. Some of these people were fined, they were considered to be spreading maybe a political message of hatred. But for us, I suppose what it has done, because these broadsheets, and in fact there was a printers in Ballinamore at a certain stage, because they were so much in circulation, it meant that at least for us now there are collections of broadsheets to be found, and we know what kind of songs were being sung. Some were notoriously unreliable in that, like an oral tradition, is you would get some words in one locality to one ballad and maybe slightly different in another locality. And the problem, I suppose, then people had the lyrics, they had the news, they had the words. What about the air? So you listened to a ballad singer in the fair and you went home that evening and God knows how many ballads you'd heard or anything else you'd heard, and were you going to remember the air of that ballad? Of course not. So that ended up with a lot of people singing ballads to the same airs, to similar airs, to airs they've already had, and plenty of songs were sung to the same airs at the time.
Husband's father, Lord of Mercy, and he was the one that started the tradition of music. Thomas
He was
James.
a fiddle player.
Oh, he was a fiddle player, yeah. And he used to go around to all the pubs and they would all congregate here on a Monday night. That's the way they worked it. Each one had their night. Mughal, Tuesday night. Yeah. Here on a Monday night. It went round the week. Yeah. It was very well organised that way. But it was brilliant. And then all the travelling musicians that would come on the Shannon, they'd all come up and join up. Yeah. Oh my God, the turnout was unreal. We packed around 10 o'clock, wouldn't it? Mm. Yeah. Yeah. It started in 1960, what was it, 1963 or 4. It was going on till COVID got in front of us. Yeah. Youngsters did the best, the little ones, the tiny tots. They come in and help, yeah.
Well, it was good to have that connection, wasn't it, between
yes.
the younger and the older, they could play together.
Isn't that where it all starts?
Yeah.
The earliest person probably credited with, again, making a sustained effort really at collecting airs is probably Edward Bunting, most famous for collecting tunes and airs at the Belfast Harp Festival in 1792. In fact, I think when he put out a call and people were getting paid actually for coming and playing the airs for him so that he could notate them, I think he only got about 10 people who showed up at that time. But importantly, they brought a lot of airs with them, and you had a good age range. I think the eldest was in their 90s, so they could go right back and trace some of the airs that were there. And the reason I'm talking airs is because those airs would have been originally songs in most cases. And we can match some of the titles with some of the lyrics later on. But at the time, because a lot of the stuff was obviously Oscuelga, Bunting wouldn't have been able to write down the lyrics. And anyhow, that wasn't what he was commissioned to do. Coming from Bunting, Thomas Moore, which Moore's melodies we'd all know, Moore took a lot of Bunting's melodies actually and wrote lyrics to them. So that's where they would have originated from. After Bunting, you would have had a lot of other collectors then of tunes and airs who would have made their way around different parts of the country. You would have had the likes of Henry Hudson, George Petrie, you had William Ford and Patrick Weston Joyce. And in particular, Ford would have said that he collected over, I think, 150 airs or more from a Hugh O'Byrne, who was a piper in Ballinamore. So when we see that and we know that he would have collected them from that area, some of that stuff wasn't published until later. Patrick Weston Joyce published some of Ford's stuff, so there's a bit of a crossover between them. But what's interesting sometimes is then we can sometimes find the lyrics of something and you see that the title matches up, and we're able to put back the lyrics with the music. And one such case would be this particular ballad that I came across. Came across it in a couple of different ways. Firstly, again, to go back to the Dukas Schools collection, I came across some of the lyrics, and a lot of people said from the kind of Leitrim Longford area that this was a well-sung ballad at the time. And another great authority on this is actually Pádraig Cullen, who's better known maybe for his writing of poetry and The Old Woman of the Roads, for example, and he would have written lots of plays, and he would have moved in literary circles. But more than that, he was from North Longford, but he would have mixed in Cavan, Leitrim, Longford circles, and definitely amongst the peasantry, if for want of a better word. And he would have picked up a lot of what they would have been passing amongst them, and he had a huge interest in ballads. So he actually said this particular ballad too was well sung throughout the area, particularly after the happenings of 1798, which there were quite a few ballads written about, and which had Leitrim links too. So we would have seen, kind of Clune, Gortletra area brought into the 1798 happenings. So this song is called Paddy Shawn Bonn. I'll just sing a verse or two of it for you. So we basically got the words, put it back together, a couple of different versions of it, but as best we can to piece it back together and put it with its air. You brave sons of Ulster, I hope you'll attend, and likewise give ear to these verses I pen, concerning young Riley, a valiant young man, well known by the name of young Paddy Shawn Bonn. Near South Wales' fair castle, this young man was bred. His parents, they reared him without fear or dread. For good education, none could him excel, but his late desolation I am sorry to tell. It was on a May morning, as I hear people say, to the sweet county Leitrim this boy made his way. When meeting with Humes and his bloody band, they opposed valiant Riley and caused him to stand. And so the song continues. Basically, Paddy Shawn Bonn had survived the 1798 rebellion, but he ended up then, there was plenty of inquiries after that, and to focus on anybody maybe who was considered a bit of an upstart at the time, and he ended up kind of being duped and was executed, I believe in Carrick-on-Shannon, although there were plenty of different tales about him. So that's just an example of where sometimes you can take some of the lyrics that you find and pin them back with their melodies because of the two different sides of the collections. Just to say, predating then all those collectors of airs and all the rest, who was really important to this area was of course the great composer Turlough O'Carolan. So O'Carolan would have written plenty of songs, and I think some people don't realise that. For example, She Begs She More is a song, so there are lyrics to it. It was written as a song, and the air probably much better known than the lyrics themselves. Reason being, obviously, because he would have written Oscuelga. And that is the whole other kind of issue, I suppose, when trying to trace back ballads. And the reason why a lot of ballads has been lost is because the language itself was lost. And that poses great difficulty for us when trying to trace back certain things. Because yes, there were some ballads that were translated into English, but oftentimes people said they lost their meaning and lost their kind of, the whole kind of sense of what they were supposed to be Oscuelga. Interestingly enough then, in the Dögen project, so Wilhelm Dögen, he was a German professor, and he was put in charge of the sound collection in the Prussian Library in Berlin. And he, in the early 1900s, would have made recordings of different languages because he was interested in language learning. And in Ireland in the 1920s, they asked him to record the Irish language. And he was sent to the Gaeltacht areas as well as to areas where the Irish language would have been all but gone, as such. It had disappeared in most places. And in 1930, he recorded Anna Feely. And Anna Feely is from Glenaid, or was from Glenaid in North Leitrim, and she sang 4 Irish ballads, so 4 ballads Oscuelga, not ballads that were particular to Leitrim or to any particular region. They were popular ballads within the Gaelic tradition at the time. But interestingly enough, they did say that, first of all, she couldn't read nor write, so therefore she had to have picked up these ballads through some kind of oral tradition. And also, she was deemed to be about 85 to 90 years of age. So that would have meant that those ballads would have come from, say, famine times and survived through those certain times. And we know from other reports, say there was a report done in 1837, I think it was, on Leitrim itself, to see where Irish still existed, or where the topography maybe of the county as well. And we're told that people in Leitrim at that time spoke English, apart from a few of the more remote mountain regions. So that means, the Irish language lost, the Irish ballads lost, only a kind of a tenuous link there, and there's one link with Anna Feely, but other than that, nothing else being collected from Leitrim Oscuelga. Which, as I say, at least it means that survived through famine times, and I think that famine and those times is like, was the end of one, I suppose, era as such in terms of ballads, and the beginning of another, really. It was really a kind of a point in time when you're looking at research into ballads and in County Leitrim or anywhere. Because obviously what stemmed from famine times were the huge amount of emigration ballads, which would be, what we'd be most well known for, I think, and ballads about the American wakes and sense of loss. And I think that at that time, they were the Irish people's response in a way to grief and to loss through the ballads. And of course, the people who left brought ballads with them as well. I mean, I think our most famous ballad in the tradition of traditional singing from Leitrim is The Shores of Lough Bran, which we all know. Sit ye down, loyal comrades, sit ye down for a while, till I spend my last hours around Erin's green isle. Come fill up your glasses, and we will drink hand to hand. For tomorrow I'll be leaving the shores of Lough Bran. I think if you ask anybody around here, traditional ballad, they would know that one. And that ballad has spread throughout Ireland and obviously further afield. And it's interesting because this is again another thing that's typical of the oral tradition. The ballad changes. I mean, I've heard people singing about Fermanagh, Green Hills and so on with the same ballad. That particular ballad was composed, ironically enough, by a Roscommon man, but he composed it for his friend who lived at Lough Bran, which is obviously between Carrick-on-Shannon and Drummond, or Drumshanbo, sorry, so Carrick-on-Shannon and Drumshanbo. And it typifies the scenes of the time, so the neighbours gathering to say goodbye. The American wake was a wake. People were leaving, they were going, they weren't coming back. So I think that within those ballads, there's that sense of sadness, that sense of loss. And another ballad, which to me, going around traditional singing circles, I would hear this quite often, and it's a ballad that's very well known, but perhaps not always as linked to Leitrim as the shores of Lough Bran, is this ballad that I picked up from the singing of Seamus MacMahuna when I was a teenager, so years ago. And Seamus MacMahuna is from County Clare and would be steeped in tradition, but he would have done a lot of collecting of songs as well throughout the country. And it's only in recent times that I realised through research that this song was very popular around this area, around the Sligo area. And I'm, in fact, personally, just from my gable window, I can see the remnants of an old stone house that was there. There's just a little gable and chimney left, and there was Kenny family who lived there in the 1800s. And one of the children that were brought up there in the late 1800s, she moved to England and she came back and settled and married, lived not far from where I am also. And I'm told on good authority by local historian Des Guckian that she used to sing this song. And again, I was just fascinated that I had learnt it and had no connection with it, and suddenly it had this connection. And this song, it's called Ye Sons and Fair Daughters. So again, I'll give you a bit of it till you can see really that it's a song of the people, and you can imagine the people around here connecting with it. Ye sons and fair daughters of Erin's green isle, I pray stand attention and listen a while. Our sons and fair daughters, they're all going away. In thousands they're leaving for America. Their friends all do gather and the neighbours also. Their trunks are all packed up, just ready to go. And the tears from their eyes fall down like the rain when the horses are leaving, going off for the train. When they reach the station, you can hear their last cries, their handkerchiefs waving and bidding goodbye. Their parents will tell them to be sure for to write, and they all watch the train till it goes out of sight. When they reach the steamer after leaving the strand, they give one last look around at their own native land, saying our hearts they are breaking at leaving thy shore. So goodbye to old Ireland, shall we ne'er see you more. So good luck to those people and safe may they land. They are leaving their homes for a far distant land, and here in old Ireland no longer may stay. In thousands they're sailing for America. So I think that you can hear the sadness and how that could just be the simple tale of somebody heading off. Interestingly enough too, just where we are here in Drumsna railway station, which is obviously not in use now as a station at all, was once known as the crying station. So I'm sure from those songs it will be understandable why. Another, I suppose, consequence really of the famine is that you had people who left and brought the songs with them. So you had, obviously maybe at the very beginning when people leaving, it was tough, conditions were difficult. They were still hankering after home and looking back at it maybe with rose-tinted glasses in a way. But what it did mean that as we got kind of closer to the 1900s and after that, we were looking at recording then being popular in places like New York and London and so on. So you would have had a couple of artists and a couple of singers and people from here. I'm thinking of the likes of Nan Fitzpatrick, for example. She would have travelled from Mohavas and would have been recorded in the 1920s, along with others like Frank Quinn would have been a singer and a musician from Drumlish. So there was a kind of a circle of them, but oftentimes what they brought was their songs that they would have been singing here at a certain stage, but they kind of they staged them. They kind of made them stage American, if you like, or stage Irish. I don't know which is the right term to use, but you might have quick piano playing or, you know, something else kind of whistling in the middle of it as well. But I suppose what it was doing was, for us, again, putting down a marker, putting down a record of what was there and what they would have been singing and what they would have brought with them and seen as being important. So that for us, for researching purposes, is really good to have. Also within the early American papers, in American newspapers and different articles, you would see where some of those Irish emigrants too would have submitted songs and ballads and poems of home. Sometimes they would have composed stuff as well, because again, their dealing with having left was to look back and to write fondly, again, back to the Din Shankas, look back fondly at their homeland. So for example, in a Gaelic American newspaper, I came across these words he was a man called Dickinson from North Leitrim, and he wrote this lovely a few verses about the hills of Leitrim. And to me, they spoke to me, the words spoke so much, I just had to put an air to it. So that often happened, where people wrote verses and an air was put to it. Again, I'll just give you a verse of it to give you an idea. My attic room is cold and grey above the narrow street, and up the winding stair there comes no sound of friendly feet. I'm dreaming of old voices, and I think I smell the peat in a house among the little hills of Leitrim. So it goes on to express, I suppose, his sorrow at having left and his memories of what went on in Leitrim in his boyhood days. So I think songs like that and ballads like that started to appear, and not just in the Gaelic or the American papers as such, but also in the Irish papers. So when we started looking at, you know, the earlier on seditious ballad article came from a paper that was very much controlled maybe, and political wise, you know, you weren't going to rock the boat, if you like. But in the early say Leitrim Observer, for example, early 1900s to 1930s maybe, there was again a lot of political change within there, and there was a bit of more sense of pride maybe for Gaelic traditions, and a lot of people again would have submitted ballads and poetry and verse and in praise of customs and themselves and all of that. So there's plenty of those to be found. Old Moore's Almanac too would have poets and bards who would have submitted works to those as well. So it's good to have again that stuff on record. And after that time, you would have had people then too, like after, say, those years of the War of Independence and Civil War and so on, you had people like, say, Cumann na Mban, for example, who would have definitely driven a lot of Irish traditions and tried to get things back up and going. In this area, in the Leitrim area, one particular person who comes to mind at that stage was Father Peter Conifrey. Now, Father Conifrey was probably better known for his anti-jazz stance, so he gets much more bad press than good press, in terms of he was very staunch about tradition and Irish tradition and what he wanted people to be doing and singing and playing, and what he didn't want them to be listening to. So in one way, whilst he really drove the tradition for a long time, and he set up plenty of things like Ceilidh bands, and he had concerts galore, he did recordings for radio, he was also a ballad singer himself, and he collected a lot of stuff. But also the kind of knee-jerk reaction to a lot of that afterwards meant that some of the tradition then went in a bit of a slide too, and people weren't going to be told what to listen to or what to sing. But his collections, because again he had them and they were written down and they're recorded in some cases, at least are something we can go back to. Like, for example, a certain song that again I received from somebody who just years ago handed it to me and said this came from the Father Conifrey collection, and I wasn't even sure who he was at the time or anything about him. And I since found the same song in an early edition of the Leitrim Observer. This song was about Billy O'Rourke. And once I kind of took it, and there was an air with it as well, so it was a tune that had an air to it as well. Once I sang it, plenty of people said, oh, such a person used to sing that. So it's amazing when people hear something that they can associate really sound and music and song. It just has that power really to bring back memories. Billy O'Rourke, bit of an upbeat tempo and a bit of maybe a jollier theme. Again, I'll give you just a verse to give you a flavour of it. In the sweet county Leitrim, I first at my home, I noticed in Connaught I deemed this no shame. The night it was born there was humour and joy, to know that me daddy had such a fine boy. Can have Rona the midwife did talk to me, daddy's thick lips and your mommy's puffed cheek. Be the hooky, said Paddy, such a son to his daddy, we'll get the child christened this very night week. So plenty of hilarity and jollity to that one. So I mean those songs generally kind of the happier songs were more about the wakes and the weddings and the christenings and the parties and all the rest, and of course lifted the spirits. And I think there was a bit of probably a bit of that kind of sense of, you know, let's go, and there might have been a little bit of fun made of it too, in terms of when you look at say the American recordings, they oftentimes kind of made fun of that and made it very much stage Paddy, if you like, in a way. But going on from those collections from the likes of Peter Conifrey, we also look at recordings. So recordings in Ireland then were starting to be more popular, and again one of the names that would come up if you Google even, you know, traditional singing in Leitrim, one of the names that's most prominent is probably that of Tom Moran. So Thomas Moran, a singer from Drumrahal in Esslin near Mohill, he would have been recorded by Seamus Ennis, who was again commissioned through the Folklore Commission. He would have gone around to collect ballads. He was on a particular mission though, to find particular ballads. So there were the child ballads that would have travelled through the English-speaking world. He was interested to know what version of them might exist in different places in Ireland, and if people were singing them, you know, had they changed in any way, how many would they know, how many of them in the collection would they know. And Thomas Moran had a huge collection of these ballads. Funny enough though, at this stage he was recorded in the 1950s, I think, and I mean he was probably at that stage quite an old man, and he hadn't travelled too far, so he got these songs from God knows where and was singing them. But what he often did with them is he made them local. So you would put in a local name. So for example, there was the Bonny Lass of 5EO, which is well known within all the tradition, but he sang Polly-O. So he would have sang it, a regiment of soldiers came to Mohill, a regiment of soldiers came to Mohill, and the captain on parade, he fell in love with a handsome maid, and the name that she was called was Handsome Polly-O. So she no more came to Mohill than anything, but that's kind of was the tradition of the time, and particularly probably to make the songs more familiar to people and to make them more interesting, he set them in place. So that was, he was wont to do that and put in a little bit of Leitrimism into some of them as well. So Thomas Moran, his son Michael Moran then would have continued the tradition, and there are also recordings of him. And these recordings are available actually in digital collections, so through the BBC collections and the British Sound collections too. You can find those there. So many of them are in folders where you have to go and apply for them, but there are others that can be listened to, and others that appeared on particular LPs and CDs over the years as well of collections. To go back to kind of collectors as well in terms of Father Peter Conifrey, in terms of tunes, there were also local fiddle masters and mostly fiddle masters actually, but local teachers of tunes who would have also had airs and would have collected a number of songs. Alex Sutherland comes to mind. He would have been from Toome in Carrigallen, and he had actually a rescued manuscript of stuff. So he would have taught a lot of musicians. He was basically a fiddle master, they would have called him at the time, but he would have collected a lot of tunes and passed them on, and a lot of people learned from him. But his own manuscript of stuff, I think something in terms of there was a flood of something in the house where they were throwing out stuff, and somebody happened to come across this manuscript of stuff, and within it, as well as the tunes, were a couple of songs. So some of the songs were already within a tradition that you could recognise, okay, they were well sung by everybody, but there's others that we don't know whether he wrote them or where they would have came from. So it's always interesting, it's great. I love when somebody comes across something like that, because straight away you're thinking, yes, something new old, if you like. So again, he and people like him would have been preserving a tradition and preserving some of the airs too. To go back then to Michael Moran and those recordings and Seamus Ennis and all of those, at the same time as Michael Moran was recorded, the wonderful May Reynolds Malone was being recorded. And May Reynolds, she was an All-Ireland ballad singer. I think actually she won her All-Ireland in Boyle at the All-Ireland Fla. She was recorded by Seamus Ennis at the time too, and she would have sung The Shores of Lough Bran and plenty of other songs from around. She would have done tours of Ireland, would have toured the dance halls, done certain spots and concerts, and also did a bit of the pub scene too at a certain stage. And May, she's a great lady. I mean, she'd say to you that she would come home and, you know, there'd be a buzz of the stage, but she'd come home and she'd put on the wellies and they'd be out in the field. So there was nothing, it was very much a very natural thing to her. And to hear something like that means she was picking these songs up from around her, and she's a wonderful link in that chain to have there. Similar to May, we have Josephine McNamara from Ahavas. So the McNamara family are well known for their music and their preservation of music. Ahavas and Clune had this particular pocket of song and dance and music that seemed to be carried through the years, down to a lot of good people. Like we mentioned Father Conifrey there, but you had Michael Whelan, for example, is a wonderful historian and has written plenty of ballads and kept a lot of that and kept groups playing and singing and speaking Irish and all the rest. And Josephine McNamara and the McNamara family too have a vast collection of recordings, some of them again available on ITMA, the Traditional Music Archives website. Josephine would have sang ballads too from the late John P. Blessing from that area, who would also have been singing in the generation before that. So it's great to know that there was a kind of a line down from there, that they were being passed down from one to the other. In other areas, Michael O'Rourke, the singing postman from Carrick and Shannon. So singing postman, so known because he was singing as he was working, which I think is a great sign. I mean, he obviously was enjoying it. And his children, so I was speaking to Bertie a few weeks back, his son Bertie sings, and he tells me that Michael was always singing, so as he was working, but Michael would have travelled and got his ballads from different areas. So he was from Cavan originally, would have got a lot of his ballads from Ulster, from that tradition, as North Leitrim as well would be prone to doing, because we've got this, you know, we're bordered with so many different counties. So depending on what was happening in those areas and beside us, that tended to influence what was being sung and passed down in those areas too. So Michael would have got those ballads by travelling, going to, again, he was an All-Ireland champion singer and lilter, and he would have gone to lots of different events, as did Bertie, to different flas. But I thought it was kind of sad. Bertie just said that in Carrick and Shannon, for example, when his father was younger and when Bertie himself was a boy, that his father wouldn't have gone in and sang at sessions. You know, if there was a music session going on, it wouldn't really have been the thing or tolerated for someone to come in and to sing a ballad. And that still happens. I'm so fortunate. I mean, we're sitting here today in Midloughlin's in Drumsna. We used to call them the butcher's sessions. So Tommy's father, he was a butcher years ago. In fact, I think he had every trade going in this establishment years ago. And we'd have sessions plenty of times here where you'd have mountains of musicians, but they would always stop and let you sing a song. So you'd get through the night with maybe 3 or 4 songs, and that's really good. I really think that songs and tunes should be side by side. And I know that nobody wants to, to think you're going to take over the whole thing, but if people are happy to stop for a while and to listen, I think that's really, really important. And it's another aspect of why a lot of the ballads were lost. We simply lost the art of listening, I think, as well. Because if you think about the function of those ballads was really to bring the news and to entertain. And I think there's quicker ways of bringing news and entertainment now, so people have lost the patience for it in some ways. But that was, coming from Michael, as he said, he made it his business to go and to find these songs and to bring them around. Other people who have done wonderful stuff really for traditional singing, of course, the late Mary McPartlin from Drumkeeran, She would have, again, had a vast repertoire of songs and would have mined the songs in her own area and put them out there. We've the likes of Eleanor Shanley, of course, who brings some of the songs from here and puts them out to a wide audience, which is always brilliant. You also had poets and bards. Didn't mention, say, Thomas Flynn, for example, who would have written My Own Leitrim Home, which would be another well-known Leitrim ballad, but there were plenty of others that he wrote as well, that people, even Bertie mentioned his father, Michael, would have put airs to some of the ballads that Tom would have written years back. John Keaveney from Mully's, from Manor Hamilton, would have written a lot of songs and ballads that people would have sang around the area and would still be sure of. And those bards and poets and of a particular area were so important. They played a vital function, and I think it's great that their stuff was being sung. We have in our area just up the road here, Dick Maxwell. He still would write laments and would write about particular local events and events in history. I just think it's great to have that as a continuation. It's definitely a dying trade, if you like, but I think it's a wonderful thing to have all these things kept for posterity, as well as really it's immortalising people and places. I can't leave out the great Rosie Stewart. I know Rosie's a Fermanagh woman, but her links with Kilty Clogher and that area, you know, there's a huge crossover there between the songs that she would sing and the songs in that area. They're very, very close border-wise. Patrick Hugh Kelly as well, in Dromahare, would be bringing songs from that area. He would travel to a lot of the singer sessions. And speaking of singer sessions, I mean, I think now, we spoke about music sessions. It's not always easy, as I said, to get a load of singers into a music session and have them all sing. So people have kind of crossed over to the dark side, into the singing circles, if you like, which means that people are there to listen to the song. And Rosie would have ran the Rainbow Singer Circle in Glenfarne before COVID hit us, of course. And we would have other singer circles around, no others in Leitrim, but we'd have, say, the Boyle Singer Circle, you'd have Sligo, we'd have Roscommon. Dublin has plenty of singer circles, and within these kind of lockdown times we've had plenty online sessions in terms of Zoom. Not ideal in terms of, you know, there's not that sense of everybody sitting together, but people are still getting their chance to sing, and it does open the circle, so anybody from anywhere can join in these singer sessions. And it has opened up a lot of conversations, I think, too, because if you get somebody from America or from England or wherever in on this in a Dublin session, and you get someone from Leitrim in it as well, you hear a song and suddenly realise, oh, there's a connection there. So it has opened lots of new kind of possibilities, lots of digitising of archival stuff. Irish Traditional Music Archives, I've mentioned there already. Alan Woods, who's actually a great grandson of the aforementioned Thomas Moore, and he has a huge interest in this, and he works in ITMA, which is great link. He's great to have there because, again, we kind of cross over in a lot of the material we have, and it's wonderful to have a similar interest, or if somebody finds something that they know, well, here's where to go to. So I do think that, you know, although ballad singing, it has changed, but everything has changed, I suppose. There's still those outlets, it's still there. There's still people like Ye Vagabonds and all sorts of groups that are bringing old songs back into vogue. And I think it's just, you know, it's wonderful to see. And I really do believe that it holds its own. It has a, you know, really important place within the tradition. 'Tis there that my thoughts ever linger, no matter wherever I roam. I ask not for fame nor for fortune, just give me my own Leitrim home. Lough Gill with its castle-crowned islands, the bright sparkling gem of the west, while she begs like a fond loving mother as she clasped Finn McCool to her breast. She more wakens up in the morning, all clad in her mantle of grey. Schleven Erin smiles down on the Shannon to wish it Godspeed on its way. 'Tis there that my thoughts ever linger, no matter wherever I roam. I ask not for fame nor for fortune, just give me my own Leitrim home. Oh, the joys of an old Leitrim cottage, when the cold winter nights come along. The neighbours trip into the kitchen, and they fill it with laughter and song. The shanachie sits in the corner to tell of the days that are past, while the Bananchee's wholehearted welcome takes the chill from the cold winter's blast. 'Tis there that my thoughts ever linger, no matter wherever I roam. I ask not for fame nor for fortune, just give me my own Leitrim home.